Okay, in this episode, I'm going to tell you what Bill Gates says provides lessons more important than ever, what Ray Dalio uses to structure how he hires and fires in his billion-dollar company, and the reason why Steve Jobs was able to launch a product which revolutionized the world. I'm going to give you 3 of the key ideas which will change the way you think. So simply put, I'm going to tell you how to think like a billionaire. And let me tell you why that matters. Right, it's a bumpy flight and 15 men dropped down from the Montana sky. It was 1949 and these were elite smoke jumpers. At the time, what was considered elite woodland firefighters. Parachute into extinguishing a forest fire. The fire lit up the sky as they made their way down the Missouri River. Right, after about a quarter of a mile, a guy called Wagner Dodge, I know, incredible name, one of the firefighters, saw that the fire had leapt ahead of them. The flames as high as 30 feet in the air, crossing the speed of 2 American football fields in less than a minute, way faster than most can run. Feared of being trapped, Dodge did something unthinkable. He stopped, he lit a match, and he burnt the grass around him. He then lay in the grass. This created an air pocket, which meant that the fire couldn't spread to him. One of the crew later recalled that they thought Dodge had lost it. Though Dodge really did try and convince others to do the same, some just ran faster. They panicked, they didn't even shed their heavy equipment. 12 men died that day. The thing that saved Dodge that day while others perished was not his physical fitness, it was his ability to not give in to panic, to think in a different way. Alright, so that story was taken from the excellent Think Again by Adam Grant. This is the book which raised plaudits from Bill Gates, Daniel Kahneman, and Ray Dalio. So let's think about this in life. How often do we reward academic intelligence? What about physical intelligence or perhaps wit? But what about mental dexterity? The ability to think again. I would contend that the secret to being successful in life, financially or otherwise, has so much more to do with how we think than we give credit. We live in a world where there is growing more and more polarization, where everyone now has their own echo chamber on social media, where we're raised to think that being wrong means that you've done something wrong. And to what extent does that blind us to true solutions? So I'm going to go over some ideas that can stop you getting lost in your perspective and being blind to the opportunities around you. Okay, idea 1, think like a scientist. Do you know what absolutely stinks? This toxic culture of the brilliant and lone entrepreneur. It's the idea that pure ego and vision creates genius. Where for most of us, it's a painful and an iterative process learning. In the book, Adam Grant talks about how we need to act more like a scientist, to actually go through and test the hypothesis on what we believe. Basically, approach our own beliefs in a scientific way instead of absolutes, where we settle on the conclusion before we hear the argument. It's about being open to the reality that facts can change. In the book, Grant says we need to overcome the overconfidence cycle, which goes pride, conviction, confirmation bias, and validation. And we need to change that into the rethinking cycle of humility, doubt, curiosity, and then discovery. And I want to tell you just how important this cycle of rethinking is. Let's compare what I'm using to film this on, an iPhone, to this. Mike Lazaridis, I hope I've got that right, was a science prodigy. He excelled academically and stood out from his peers at school. When Mike invented the Blackberry, he was thinking like a scientist. The keyboard on most wireless email devices at the time was too small, causing people having to forward their email at a time, which took an age to download. And the concept behind the Blackberry was simple. What if people could type an email with their thumbs instead of their fingers? This led to the success of a product that had celebrities and business leaders raving about how essential it was to their life. At one time, BlackBerry controlled 50% of the smartphone market in the US and 20% globally. Anyway, roll on the summer of 2007, and across Mike's desk landed an iPhone. Initially, he was absolutely stunned by the computing power and apparently remarked, "Look, they put a Mac in this thing." Anyway, as the iPhone started to take off, Mike was being pushed by his engineers that they should add on an internet browser to the BlackBerry. But he declined, saying, "Look, focus only on email." He was convinced that an internet browser would drain the battery and strain the bandwidth of wireless networks. In 2010, Mike was steadfast to his uncompromising vision that there were no significant changes to the Blackberries that needed to be made. Sadly, these thoughts led the company into an eventual decline, and why you're not seeing it in your pocket today. Alright, so let's turn to Steve Jobs. Look, he was the person that co-founded Apple, but the posthumous view of him is that visionary pioneer who thought different. The reality actually was that Jobs was doing anything but this initially with the mobile phone market. Jobs was publicly resistant to the concept of getting into the mobile phone market as he thought they sucked. The iPhone actually began as an experimental product undertaken without his knowledge. Apparently in 2004 in a meeting when a small group of engineers pitched the initial concept of turning the very successful iPod into a phone, Jobs said, "Why the F would I want to do that? That is the dumbest idea I've ever heard." Anyway, over time, the engineers worked closely with Jobs and convinced him that they had no intention of turning Apple from a computer company into a phone company. After 6 months of debating, Jobs eventually gave in to the team and said they could develop the project. He was able to think again. The iPhone launched in 2007 and it became their most successful product ever. And of course, it changed the world. So the scientific thinking process here is where we think and rethink what might be true based on the facts at the time. It can be the difference between, well, look, an old tech relic and that thing that's still in your pocket. Anyway, look, if you enjoyed that story or this episode so far, you should really sign up for my mailing list as I talked about this last year in one of the blog pieces. So you can stay up to date with that, personal finance stuff, pension, investments, all that kind of good stuff. There's a link in the description. Okay, idea 2. Foster constructive conflict. In normal office environments, the last thing we want is conflict. But are we actually missing something by doing this? Is it because it often feels personal, or as if you're being attacked? If, however, you approach these conflicts with genuine curiosity, it can be the key which unlocks a new way of thinking. Too often, myself included, we can stick to our beliefs despite the fact that facts in the other direction are piling up. And the reason why we don't accept this is because somewhere along the way, we've somehow connected our identity to something. We've literally made it personal. This is why so many of us are willing to die on the hill for some reason. I think these insights could be as true for the have fun staying poor crypto bros. Choose your controversial political topic of choice which doesn't make sense. Anyway, according to Grant, we need to separate our identity from our beliefs. And Ray Dalio, the billionaire hedge fund manager, specifically sets up his business where his colleagues rate each other's performance and ideas, openly debating the merits of them. Let him tell you.
The dot collector collects these views. It has a list of a few dozen attributes, so whenever somebody thinks something about another person's thinking, it's easy for them to convey their assessment. They simply note the attribute and provide a rating from 1 to 10. For example, as the meeting began, a researcher named Jen rated me a 3, in other words, badly, for not showing a good balance of open-mindedness and assertiveness. As the meeting transpired, Jen's assessments of people added up like this. Others in the room have different opinions. That's normal. Different people are always going to have different opinions. And who knows who's right?
I think it is so easy for us to think that conflict is a bad thing. But one of the best stories in relation to this was that of the Wright brothers. The Wright brothers used to intensely debate and argue between each other, often sometimes going late into the night and then next morning continuing the argument. But it was that same debate and argument and conflict which constructed the ideas between them. There was a curiosity between them, despite having very intense arguments, that the other person might have the answer. And it's those developments and those breakthroughs which eventually led to them, I think the thing that I like about this idea is that if we saw conflict as a learning experience instead of a personal attack, it opens us up to thinking that we might not originally have embraced. Okay, idea 3, embrace complexity. There was a landmark study once done on coffee consumption, and the media headline on the same study were, "Here is more evidence that coffee is good for your brain, Forbes." Whereas another headline said, "Increasing coffee intake is harmful to the brain," CBS Atlanta. The thing is, they actually were both right. Elements of the same study both had remarks which were true. But both of the newspapers cited different elements of this study. It was actually only the Washington Post which reflected the complexity of the message, saying yesterday's coffee science is good for the brain, today not so fast. The truth is we live in a complex and nuanced world, more than we probably allow ourselves to take in. So why do I really like these ideas, and why was this book probably one of my favourites from last year? Well look, as a financial planner, I have to help people make good decisions. And believe it or not, it's actually really difficult sometimes to understand what a good outcome will always be. It's incredibly personal. So it's really important to have good judgment and understand different levels of not only perspective, but thinking. You have to have an open mind to be a good financial planner, in my view. Otherwise, look, it could just all be done by an algorithm, and I don't think that's happening anytime soon. I hope if you've taken anything from this episode, you've taken the fact that we have a choice to consider methods to be both a critical thinker and open-minded, and it's not an either or. So let me leave you with a quote. What I believe is a process, not a finality. Thanks for watching.